Look who crawled out of the fire, still breathing, still standing where the collapse was supposed to happen, still conscious after the moment that was designed to erase you. They were so certain, weren't they? Certain that this would be the breaking point, certain that the weight was too much, the loss too deep, the silence too loud, certain that whatever you were before would finally give in, finally dissolve into something smaller, quieter, manageable. They mistook your openness for fragility, your empathy for a weak spot, your patience for ignorance. And when the ground gave way beneath you, when everything familiar burned down to its foundations, they waited, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, patiently, watching for the unraveling. But something else happened in that fire, something they never learned how to recognize, because that wasn't your destruction, that was your examination. Not the kind with rules and instructions, not the kind anyone prepares you for, the kind that happens when there is no audience, no rescue, no reassurance that it will end. The kind where the only witness is your own awareness, and in that darkness, stripped of identity, stripped of approval, stripped of every role you played to survive socially, you met something underneath it all. You met the part of you that doesn't perform, doesn't negotiate with fear, doesn't collapse just because it's expected to. That's the part they never accounted for. While they thought you were falling apart, you were paying attention. While they thought you were losing yourself, you were discovering what remained when everything unnecessary burned away. Pain didn't just hurt you, it educated you. It taught you what safety really is worth when it's conditional. It taught you how quickly loyalty dissolves when it becomes inconvenient. It taught you the difference between people who speak about care and people who practice it when there's nothing to gain. You learned in weeks what takes most people a lifetime to avoid. And that kind of learning leaves marks, not visible ones, structural ones. Your perception changed first. You stopped taking words at face value, stopped confusing attention with commitment, stopped mistaking intensity for truth. You started noticing patterns, who vanished when things became complicated, who stayed silent when your name came up, who needed you to remain broken so they wouldn't have to question their own comfort. And slowly, quietly, without announcing it, your boundaries rewired themselves. You no longer reacted the way you used to. Guilt lost its grip. Shame stopped sticking. Manipulation felt obvious, almost boring, not because you hardened, but because you clarified. That clarity unsettles people. They feel it before they understand it. The pause before they speak to you now. The way their confidence wavers when you don't rush to explain yourself. The discomfort that surfaces when you don't accept behavior you once tolerated. You're not louder. You're not aggressive. You're not trying to prove anything, and that's what confuses them. Because the usual levers don't work anymore. You don't chase reassurance. You don't overextend to be liked. You don't bleed publicly to earn empathy. You learned something in the fire that can't be unlearned, that most systems rely on your participation, on your silence being reactive, not chosen, on your kindness being limitless, not discerning. When that collapsed, so did their expectations. Isolation stopped feeling like rejection. It started feeling like protection. Silence stopped feeling like weakness. It started feeling like precision. You realized how much noise exists just to avoid depth. How many conversations are designed to keep things light. And once you've sat alone with yourself in the dark long enough, surface-level connection stops being tempting. That's the loneliness no one warns you about. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of seeing clearly, of noticing that many people are still living inside the world you already outgrew. Still negotiating with versions of themselves you had to bury to survive. They call you changed now, as if change were a failure. as if evolution were a betrayal of who you were supposed to remain. But what they're really reacting to is this: you no longer need their agreement to exist. Your presence doesn't ask permission anymore. It doesn't bend to make others comfortable. It doesn't rush to smooth edges that were never meant to be rounded. And that makes people nervous because you've become proof. Proof that something can burn completely and still stand. Proof that collapse doesn't have to end in disappearance. Proof that pain, when faced directly, doesn't just scar. It restructures. You didn't come out of the fire louder. You came out heavier, not burdened, grounded. There's a weight to you now, a steadiness that wasn't learned from books or advice or encouragement. It was learned by staying present when leaving would have been easier. By breathing through moments that felt endless. By choosing not to disappear even when no one would have blamed you if you did. That kind of endurance rewrites how you move. You don't rush anymore. You don't over-explain. You don't hand out access without observing how it's handled. And people feel that shift instinctively. Some step closer, curious but cautious. Some step back, unsettled without knowing why. Some try to pull the old version of you forward, hoping it still exists. It doesn't, not because you killed it, but because it served its purpose. You are not hardened steel. You are refined metal, compressed, tempered, able to hold more weight without bending. And the strangest part, you didn't build this strength to impress anyone. You built it because you had to, in the absence of applause. In the absence of witnesses, in moments that will never be spoken about, because language can't quite reach them. That's why it's real. And that's why it can't be taken from you. They are trying to understand when it happened, looking for the moment you changed, scrolling through memories, conversations, old versions of you, searching for the pivot point. They'll never find it. Because it wasn't a moment, it was 1,000 quiet decisions. To stay, to observe, to rebuild internally while everything external fell apart. And you're still rebuilding, not back to who you were, forward into something more precise. You're not finished. The fire didn't give you closure. It gave you direction. And what's forming now isn't something that needs to be announced. It's something that continues, and that direction pulls you forward quietly, without spectacle. You don't rush toward it. You don't chase clarity like it owes you something. You walk steady, because you learned what panic costs and what patience builds. There's a difference now in how you occupy space. You listen more than you speak, not because you're unsure, but because you no longer waste words on rooms that can't hold them. You observe before you commit, not out of fear, but out of respect for what your energy is worth. You choose deliberately, because randomness stopped feeling romantic once you understood the price of chaos. People sense it. They may not have language for it, but they feel the recalibration, the way you don't lean in when they pull away, the way you don't flinch when they test boundaries you no longer negotiate. Some of them mistake this for distance. Others call it coldness. A few accuse you of being guarded, as if protection were a moral failing. But you know better. You know that boundaries are not walls. They are filters. They let in what nourishes and keep out what corrodes. And once you've rebuilt yourself from the inside out, you don't invite chaos back in just to prove you're healed. You don't need to prove anything anymore. That's another thing the fire burned away. The compulsion to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. You learned that clarity isn't loud. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg to be recognized. It stands, and when clarity stands long enough, confusion reveals itself in others. You see it in the way conversations shift when you enter the room, in the way jokes land softer like they're being tested for safety, in the way people explain themselves a little more around you, sensing accurately that you can see through performance, not because you're superior, because you've been stripped down before. You've seen what people look like when the masks fail. You've heard what they say when they think nothing matters anymore. You've watched who stays and who disappears when the cost of loyalty becomes real. That kind of vision doesn't turn off. It changes how you connect. You slower to trust, but when you do, it's intentional. You're selective, not closed. You're open, but not exposed. There's a difference, and the difference is survival. You don't mistake chemistry for character anymore. You don't confuse intensity with intimacy. You don't let potential override behavior. Those lessons were expensive. You paid for them in nights that felt endless and mornings that felt impossible. And now they're part of you. The loneliness that followed wasn't emptiness. It was space. Space to hear your own thoughts without interruption. Space to feel without being corrected. Space to rebuild values that weren't inherited from fear or expectation. You discovered what you actually need. Not constant connection. Not endless reassurance. Not validation dressed up as love. You need truth. Consistency. Presence that doesn't disappear when things get complicated, and you're willing to wait for that. That willingness scares people, because most people are negotiating with their own hunger for comfort, their fear of being alone, their need to be chosen. You're not. You've already been alone in the ways that matter, so you don't cling, you don't overextend, you don't abandon yourself to keep others close. And that quiet self-loyalty reads like power to those who've never practiced it. They project all kinds of things onto you. Now they say you're intimidating. They say you're distant. They say you're different. You're right about one thing. You are different, not because you're above anyone, but because you've crossed a threshold most people avoid at all costs. You face the question that breaks people open. What remains when everything familiar is gone? And you stayed long enough to hear the answer. What remained was not bitterness, not numbness, not rage disguised as strength. What remained was awareness, the kind that sees patterns instead of excuses, the kind that recognizes cycles instead of stories, the kind that understands that healing isn't about returning to who you were. It's about becoming someone who won't abandon themselves again. That's why manipulation feels obvious now. Not insulting, not enraging, just transparent. You see when guilt is being used as leverage, when urgency is manufactured to rush your consent, when affection is conditional on compliance, and instead of reacting, you pause. That pause changes everything. Because pause is where choice lives. And once you reclaim choice, nothing works the same way on you again. You don't have to announce your boundaries. You enforce them by how long you stay, how deeply you engage, how much access you allow. You don't threaten departure. You simply stop participating when alignment ends. That's not cruelty. That's self-respect. And self-respect is quiet, but it echoes. You'll notice fewer people trying to cross you directly now. Not because they're afraid of you, but because they sense resistance won't look the way they expect. You don't argue, you don't escalate, you don't collapse. You disengage with clarity, and clarity is uncomfortable for people who rely on confusion. There will be moments, there already are, when you question this path, when the quiet feels too quiet, when you wonder if you've become too selective, too distant, too firm. That doubt is normal. It's the residue of old conditioning trying to pull you back into patterns that once kept you safe. But safety has evolved. It no longer means being liked. It means being aligned. It means choosing environments that don't require you to fragment yourself to belong. It means relationships where your nervous system doesn't have to stay on alert. You learned in the fire what peace actually costs. You're not eager to give it up, so you move forward differently. Now, not aggressively, not defiantly, deliberately. You invest where effort is mutual. You speak when words matter. You rest without guilt, and slowly, without forcing it, the world reorganizes around this new standard. Some people fall away, not dramatically, just naturally. Some reveal themselves more clearly. Some surprise you with depth you didn't expect. You don't cling to outcomes. You trust the filtration because you understand now that loss isn't always subtraction. Sometimes it's refinement. You are not the person who crawled into the fire, and you are not someone entirely new. You are the distilled version of what survived. That survival didn't make you hard. It made you precise. It didn't take your softness. It taught you where softness belongs. It didn't erase your hope. It anchored it in reality. You still care deeply, but you no longer bleed for people who won't hold the wound with respect. You still believe, but not blindly. You still love, but not at the cost of yourself. And that balance, that calm authority over your own inner world, is what people feel when they don't know why you unsettle them. You don't chase significance. You embody it quietly by being whole, by staying present, by choosing truth over comfort, by continuing forward without needing applause. The fire did not make you dangerous. It made you awake. And awake people don't need to announce their power. They live it, step by step, choice by choice, with a steadiness that doesn't need permission. You are not finished becoming, but you are finished breaking. And whatever comes next, you will meet it standing.